we got it ready. What is that? What is that Carl just said? We have Les-Misérables? Well, let me tell you, I'll give you a brass figurine with bronze oak leaf palm if you can tell me how that was pronounced around my house when I was 9 years old. I will give you the brass figurine there if you can tell me. I'll bet you find it hard to guess. Of course, South Chicago French has a very special flavor. And it was pronounced in my house as it was also pronounced down at George's Pool Room and Pinball, where much Indiana French was dispensed. That's the truth. Carl, in case you're interested, it was pronounced around my house Les-Misérables. And that seemed to have, well, what's the matter? Les-Misérables. You ought to hear how the French pronounce Connecticut. That's a pretty wild scene, too. And, of course, we don't think that's funny when they mispronounce it. It's colorful, and it's so French and so delightful, but we're very embarrassed when we say Les-Misérables is the name of that great book by, what's his name? Victor Hugo, isn't it? Yes, Victor Hugo. And I have to admit a really terrible thing here tonight, and I don't want to admit it at all, but I have to because of circumstances over which I have little or no control, and if the facts were out, few of us have little or no control over any circumstances, actually. You ever have the feeling you're caught in some big rotten net and your foot's stuck in the mud and you're beginning to go down in the quicksand for the third time and there'll be no going back and the boss is going to finally give it to you right where you deserved it all along because actually you are rotten and decadent and have absolutely no talent if the truth were out? You ever have that feeling that all of your life you've been covering up? You've gone to the Dale Carnegie courses, you've learned accounting, you've even gotten yourself a toupee, you keep your teeth from having telltale yellow, and you try to keep your knees loose and supple. You buy the Lenny Bruce records and the Joan Baez discs, and you subscribe to the Village Voice and the Post and the Reporter and Show and all the rest of them to try to keep up with the world. And in addition to that, you carry a New York Times around, and still you're decadent, rotten, untalented, and inadequate to anything that comes along, especially anything that involves more than a three-letter word, and anything that, and even if it does involve, how did I get on that? That's terrible. I'm sorry, friends. After all, it's only Monday, and we don't want to push you too hard. I don't want to be pushed either, so don't push. That's all. I won't push, and you won't push, and we'll sit here like two lumpins. Just sitting there. Clay Lumpin. Well, while we're on the subject of Clay Lumpin, you ever know what happened? He used to work over at Esquire. I remember he was in the fiction department. Of course, that's what happened to their fiction department. Oh, Clay Lumpin and his avant-garde ideas. Excuse me there, madam. Yeah, it's an in joke. You wouldn't know about that, so we don't want to be in, do we? Well, speaking of being in, I just have to admit the terrible thing. When I heard Carl in there say, so are we going to have Les Miserables on the station here? When was that made? That sounds like one of those murky films that we specialize in that are shot underwater. And they have these wild, terrible subtitles, and 97% of the values are cut out to make room for Mr. Clean commercials. Is that the kind of thing we specialize in? It's very good, yeah. Yeah, you get the Reader's Digest version of the Reader's Digest articles, and it really works on its way down. Of course, it'll be a New York film debut, I'm sure. Everything is a New York film debut. I am a New York film debut here tonight, in case you're interested. This has never been heard in New York up till tonight. Of course, it won't be heard much after tonight either, as far as I know, the way things are going. But when we're getting on with this problem of Les Miserables, well, whenever I hear that, of course, this is touching home base because I would like you to guess. I will award the brass figurine with bronze oak leaf palm. How I got the name of Jean. All of you people who think it's spelled Gene, including you, Don. I've been here on this schedule for 115 years, and the IBM machine still spells it Gene on the log. It's Jean, and I would like you to guess how I got that name. Do you have to guess? No, nothing to do with girls. No, sir. In Chicago, the name Jen had nothing to do with girls. It is only in the effete East, the glandless East, where that would be thought of. It was never thought of, not once, in the Midwest. I'll tell you how it came about. No, you can have all kinds of names. One thing I will say about the Midwest and the South too, for that matter, they are much, much more tolerant as far as names are concerned. You can call yourself Radish. Oh yeah. I knew guys named Cletus, all kinds of names. And if you had a name like that, you'd have to just bury it out in the backyard here in New York if you had a name like that. Really, that's the truth. I knew a guy's name was just LG, that's all. His name was LG. His parents liked the name LG, because many years ago they'd had a very distinguished insurance man named LG Adams. And they didn't know that his name was Leander Godfrey Adams, and so it just became LG Adams, and they named their kid LG, and to this day his name is LG Adams. Now, they don't think like that on the Grand Concourse. It's always the same. It's always the same old name. Believe me, if I've met one Herb, I've met 1,000 here from the Grand Concourse. It's a funny thing. And yet somehow the name Gene seems to you to be somehow vaguely subversive. It's a name that obviously, your parents wanted a girl. Can you imagine my old man wanting a girl? You don't know my old man then if you say that's ridiculous. A girl. My old man had a terrible desire to beget a Chicago White Sox third baseman. Now, even in those days, they did not think in terms of femininity playing third base for the White Sox. It may come to that on the Mets, but this was the White Sox, Dad, where you played hard baseball, you smoked, drank, swore, and you batted 174. It's a very different world. Well, now, how did I get this name? I will ask you. Well, I'll tell you how I'll tell you. It was really, I was named after my old man. His name was Gene, too. But how did he get his name? That's the crux of it all. It seems that his sister, who was older than he was deep in this tremendous, tremendous romantic period that 15, 16-year-old chicks go through. Now, the romantic period, of course, has changed a little bit now. That 16-year-old chicks apparently in those days were romantic about other people. Today, the 16-year-old chick will be romantic usually about herself. She will fall tremendously in love with herself and will romanticize herself beyond all recognition. Well, it was different then, and old Aunt Glenn got very romantic, and she was reading a book called Les-Misérables, which was a very romantic book, and there was a guy named Jean Valjean in there, which is the way she would pronounce it on the south side of Chicago. There was Jean Valjean. So it seems that at about that time in history, my grandmother was about to give birth to the greatest left-handed pool and snooker player to ever come out of 55th and Union. She didn't know that, of course, at that time, that she was about to give birth to greatness. And so all that they knew was that they were about to have this thing. Well, then finally this thing was born. And they stood around and they looked at each other and they thought about it. And my aunt, being a very aggressive young girl, said that we should name him Gene. She was, of course, she couldn't go all the way. Jean Valjean. That would have been. I admit that would have been tough on the south side, a name like that. So she says, let's go with Gene. So my grandmother says Gene, and my aunt says Gene. Yes, as I say, she was a very aggressive girl there. So she says Gene. So there's a lot of hollering back and forth, and finally they decided to call him Gene. Well, my grandmother decided to, fine. So she writes down Gene. Which was, and this is the truth, on the birth certificate, which was absolutely against everything that my aunt, because she was really romantic, Jean Valjean, the whole business, the clash of sabers and dark Parisian alleys and all that, Les-Misérables. Well, so there was a lot of confusion, and my aunt took the birth certificate right back to the hospital and said, you changed this, you misspelled it. Well, they never heard of it being spelled Jean like that on the south side. I'm telling you the actual story. So they called up my grandmother. They said, there's this girl down here who says we misspelled it. And of course they have the notary public and all that jazz. So my grandmother says, yes, that's the way it is to be spelled. It's to be Jean, little realizing, of course, she had just given birth to one of the great pool players of that period. And also probably one of the greatest White Sox fans ever created, and a lot of other things. So he became known as Gene in the neighborhood. Well, now at that time, no one knew the idea of it being a girl never entered anybody's mind. It really didn't. And They just said it was misspelled. In fact, I have rarely been. It's rarely been the Jean idea with being a girl's name has rarely been said to me. What is always said is that I don't know how to spell my name. That's what's always said. Well, I'm sorry. We are straight out, as we say on the Chicago South Side, because certainly they knew trial and tribulation there. The trial and tribulation of the poor, simple denizens of the streets and the twisting byways of sewer-ridden Paris. Yes, Les Miserables, Les Miserables, Les Miserables. Laugh, clown, laugh. Quack, quack, quack. Oh, the laughing of irony, the great enigmatic face of existence. Les Miserables. Oh. All right, that's how I got my name. Speaking of Les Miserables, this is WOR, AM and FM, New York. You have no idea how tortured, and we'll be here until it happens. You know, speaking of, did I say that we are in New York? Did I? Boy, I'll tell you, we are heading for some great things in New York. Just wait till the giant traffic jam starts I would say about the third or fourth Sunday after the fair has opened, and the Mets are playing a doubleheader against the Giants, and all on Sunday afternoon, and every last Girl Scout, every Cub Scout, every rubberneck tourist, and everybody in Queens, as well as 4,000 ladies' clubs from Connecticut, all decide to go to the fair at once. Well, I believe there's going to be a gigantic iron scorpion, or an enormous iron, an iron spider, really, with its center roughly about, I would say, probably around the 59th Street Bridge. That will be where the head of it is. You won't know because you'll have to. It's like a tapeworm. You cut off one head and it won't make any difference. I believe that you'll be able to cut off whole arms of this thing and never even miss the people. I think the mess will be so great that a lot of people will be just glad to get rid of a lot of other people. They just don't show up anymore. No, really, I believe that we are going to see a traffic jam every Sunday, and of course it'll get worse on that will extend roughly to Bridgeport on the one end, and will go possibly down to Trenton on the other end, and will extend pretty nearly to Montauk out on the other end of the island, and inland in Jersey will go possibly out to, I would guess around, I would say probably to the Pompano Lakes Department there, right around in that area, maybe even a little further. I'd say perhaps all the way on out to Allentown, Pennsylvania, maybe on some good days when the sun is out right, and it will remain motionless. You see, what this giant spider will be like? It will be like a moribund spider. It won't move. Everyone thinks it's all going to be moving. No, I think it will just lay there. It will lay there, and it will breathe gas in and breathe gas out, and once in a while it'll burst into flames at certain places where some guy's overload relay goes out, and he throws a hand grenade into the car behind him, and it's just going to lay there and steam and smoke, and in between all the little rows and lanes, you'll see guys who've decided to walk all the way from Pittsburgh. They'll be the only guys who will actually get into the fair. I really do. I predict that within 25 years, within 30 years, the automobile will be as obsolete as the horse, as it already is in the city. That by the time our country is one big city, it will be as difficult to own a car as it will be to own a horse. As a matter of fact, today, in a city like New York, you can own a horse easier in some ways than you can a car. You don't have to at least change the antifreeze, and no one's going to bump into it. And the insurance isn't as high on a horse. It really isn't. Do you people out there know, any of you guys who live outside of New York City, and it's going to come creeping into your area too, it has to, as the megapolis, as Lewis Mumford calls it, begins to slowly envelop us. There's no more country anymore. There's just, there's the giant city, and then there's a little less city, and then there's another giant city, and then there's a little less city, and then there's another giant city. Well, eventually all the blanks are going to be filled in. Of course, it's got to be. And when that day comes, owning a car will be strictly for the very, very, either the nutty or the very rich. Just like owning a horse today. An eccentric can own a horse in the city, and also the very rich people can own a horse. And eventually, I believe that the car will go that way for a lot of reasons. Do you know, those of you who live outside of New York, are you aware that to just own a car in New York City, I don't mean drive it around, I don't mean burn up gas and burn up tires, I'm not even discussing the cost of the car itself, not even talking about depreciation of the car. We figured it out the other night, and I figured it out with the automobile editor of one of the very hip papers, and in fact it's the Village Voice, Danny List, who knows cars. And we figured it out. And we finally came to the figure that it costs a guy who has a car in New York City, and of course he wants to put it in some kind of a garage. Now this is not the best kind of garage. He wants to put it in some kind of garage. Otherwise, it is a fact that in New York, if you own a car and you don't garage it, at the end of the first year, you will have $7,000 in tickets. At the end of the second year, you won't have a car either. Because 6 months on the New York streets parking is enough to take care of your trunk lid. It's enough to take care of your hood is pushed in already. There is no grill. Your car, which started out as, let's say, a wheelbase of 120, is now down to 95. It has a big hump in the middle where guys have banged in trying to get the parking place. You know, if they could put it on top of the curb or something, get rid of it, they would do that. But nevertheless, it costs. How much would you guess it costs to own a car without even driving it in New York City on the average, Walt? You two guys, guess. $125 a month? Well, it cost you're pretty close. As a matter of fact, we figured it out, and it comes to around between $1,100 and $1,250. Now that doesn't include the price of the car. Maybe you included the price of the car, Walt, and depreciation. I'm just saying that's what it costs you to own a car in this city. About $1,200 a year, roughly, between $1,150 and possibly between $1,150 and $1,300, depending on what insurance bracket you're in. Now that, by the way, is for a driver who is a good driver and has not gone on one of these nutty quality, what do they call it, nutty insurance situations where he has to pay $700 just to drive the car. And that's, of course, obtaining here in town, too. I know a couple of guys that have had just a couple of little minor fender banging exercises, and they're already in the class where it costs them $500 just to get into their 59 Plymouth without licenses and all the rest of it. Now that, of course, is obvious then. The obvious thing is that in the end, for most people who live in New York, it is ridiculous to own a car if it's going to cost them that much. Now, let's say, where do I get it? Figure it out. Do you know how much it costs to... Yeah, do you live in Manhattan? Oh, well, then forget it. I'm sorry, in Manhattan, you see, if you don't think it costs... First of all, do you know what it costs insurance in Manhattan? Most people don't. Well, it's pretty hard to get by in Manhattan for insurance. Just insurance, less than $250. Pretty difficult with any kind of coverage at all. It's around $250 for the ordinary automobile, and up, by the way, depending on the kind of car you have. So it's around $250 right there. You cannot get a decent garage in New York City for anywhere between $45 and $60 a month. And that's minimum, by the way. If you get one for, in most places, in fairly decent livable areas in New York, if you get one for $60, you are really lucky, actually. Well, add that up. Add that up. Then add your insurance to that. Add the fact that it is almost impossible in New York City to own a car without getting at least anywhere from 5 to 10 tickets a year. And that's not a law-breaking guy. I have not been able to do it. I've tried every possible way. In Manhattan. I'm talking about Manhattan. I'm discussing Manhattan. Now, why are you so explicit? You know when I say New York's Manhattan, I'm not talking about way down at the end of Staten Island or way out in Long Island. Manhattan, all right, then Manhattan. That makes you feel better. Okay, that's the engineer's mind. It's always working like that. So, nevertheless, the facts of the matter are that this is an increasing thing all over the country. I don't want to get into this hassle, but I'm just making a prediction that in a short time, owning a car will be a luxury like owning a horse. And they will have courses eventually where you can go on a Sunday and drive a car around a prescribed course. If you remember the old days of driving cars of your own, you will go out and drive a car like today people go out and ride a horse. They'll go to Central Park and they'll rent a horse for a while, and they'll ride it around for an hour and a half. You must remember, a horse used to be a means of transportation for every man. It was not just a rare thing that a few guys did. And so today, it would have seemed amazing to a man of, say, 200 years ago to think that a horse would be completely impractical. Completely. He would never foresee the day when guys would spend maybe $10 an hour to go to some place and put fancy clothes on to symbolically ride a horse in a circle somewhere with plastic trees around him. He would not have believed this. Well, I will predict that the day will come when old codgers who remember driving cars that were their own cars that had distinctive qualities to them, that they will go to a place where they will have cars and he can go out and drive for a while in a very carefully controlled place. And it won't be to get anywhere. That's, people who rent a horse at Central Park are not going anywhere. They're just going in a circle. Well, that's literally what you'll do with the car. You'll go out and you'll drive in a big circle through the woods. They'll have all little bridges and things fixed up so that you can pretend like you're making curves and left turns and backing up. They'll have a place where you can park, and they'll have a place where you can open her up, that kind of stuff. And it'll all be very carefully controlled, and then you'll take your car back to its barn, and you'll say, wow, boy, those are the days, and you'll walk away. And you'll feel like you've had, of course, it'll cost you $25 for 2.5 hours. And it will be a symbolic thing, because I foresee the day when this is a giant megapolis. I mean, in the far future, maybe 100 years, when the entire country is one big, enormous city. Have you ever been to a country where that's true? Well, I have been. I have been to countries where it is just one big city. They've lived there for 10,000 years, and now it's a big city. Now, so what do? Nobody owns a car. You really can't. It's impossible when there's 2.5 billion people living in a space that used to be for, say, 100,000. So you can't put a car anywhere. You can't. So eventually they wind up with systems of transportation which do away with that. Owning a car in Paris, now this is an example, is practically an impossibility. Some people do, but it's a very, very difficult thing. So the systems of transportation in those countries are highly developed. The metro system in Paris is much more developed, really, than our subway system here. You go to a country like Germany, which is far more urbanized overall than our country. You'll find that their systems of transportation are far more developed for an ordinary person to get, say, from Munich to Frankfurt. The trains are better. The system of getting there is much better than it is, say, to go from here to Philadelphia if you don't have a car. That we are in the last throes of a car civilization. I really believe this. And the automobile has gone through some interesting convolutions. At one time, to give you an idea how much it replaced the horse, we still refer to a car in terms of horsepower, as Danny pointed out. That they used to call it the horseless carriage. It was a true replacement for the horse. It really replaced a living, breathing creature. Well, now the day has come, of course, when there are so many billions of people that owning a car is practically out of the question. Here's an example. Now, most guys used to think about a car in terms of their vacation. I remember my old man used to always say that. He would think, well, when we go up to the lake, when we go up to Michigan, when we go up to places way up in Wisconsin, I got to think about the car. Well, today, even that is ridiculous, because a guy can get into an airplane here, and he can fly all the way out. He can take whoever he wants. He can fly all the way out to San Francisco and fly all the way back on an airplane on really, in many ways, less than it would cost him to do it by car, certainly in time and everything else. He has no problems either doing it. So sure, he doesn't have any mobility when he gets out there. No, but he does. What he does now is he rents a car when he gets out there. Just like a man would rent a horse years ago. Many years ago, men would rent horses. Did you know that was a big business in New York, was renting horses and stuff? You'd go to a place, you'd rent a horse. So they rent a car for a couple of days, and then they hop on the plane and come back. So the automobile, as a means of tying cities together, has disappeared, really. It has almost practically gone the way of the horse. Now, when you get into the giant megapolis, many guys We build highways. We assume that the car will always be here. Robert Moses does. He does. So he builds giant arteries of concrete, and they are all inadequate, every last one of them, because it is impossible to keep up with the great growth of these machines unless you pave the whole world. I mean, you have to pave the whole world and do away with all walking people and houses and everything. Then cars, probably there would be enough room for cars. But it is ridiculous. I think it is ridiculous for us to sink all our dough into superhighways when no one will want to go on the superhighways eventually. They just won't want to do it. It's ridiculous. So you find 8 million cars between here and Jones Beach. It's a ridiculous thing on a Sunday afternoon to try to get from Manhattan. Or say if you live in Jersey and you want to go to Jones Beach. Oh, boy. Wowee. You have to leave at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you're lucky if you miss it. But if you leave at a normal, reasonable hour, say noon, boy, it's 3.5 hours before you even get near the beach. And it might be 4:30 by the time you finally arrive. And when you do get there, the signs all say, this lot filled. I mean, there are 87 million cars who must have been there from 2 months back. They just stay there. They don't go home anymore. And then you turn around and you spend a couple hours at the beach, and everyone leaves the beach now at least 3 hours earlier than they would have wanted to. They say, well, let's beat the traffic. Well, what they do is beat what? 87 million other guys are saying it, and they get out on that Long Island Parkway, and there's one giant chunk of metal by the time 4:30 already, going back somewhere, going back to Jersey, wherever it might be. So the idea of a car is pretty silly, really. And I personally have beaten it. I have this, but I know that's not going to last. I have this little motorcycle. I go between them and around them and above them and all everywhere else. You see, everyone thinks I'm a nut, but I get there. I'm there while they're still back at the 59th Street Bridge with the radiator boiling over. But it makes it hard. So we've had to go back. Really, the car has finally defeated its purpose, and man has had to go back to the original ways to get to places, to get around the cars now. He has to start. Guys are buying bicycles now. Other guys are buying gigantic walking boots so they can walk to Jones Beach. Other guys are buying motorcycles, which were big in 1919, I understand. Other characters are buying pogo sticks. Some guys are buying stilts. But the fact is, nobody seriously buys a car with the eye to getting anywhere anymore. The car has become practically an obsolete thing. You may buy a horse, but you don't think in terms of riding it from here to Wilmington, Delaware, which is what a guy used to buy a horse for. And the final irony of it all is how many guys I know who buy cars, make a big issue about buying cars, and then they put them in the garage, and then when they go on their vacation to Maine, they fly. And you say to him, well, Charlie, you bought the car, it was a big deal. He says, yeah, but it would take me a day and a half to get there, and a day and a half back, and all that traffic on the Jersey Turnpike? What are you talking about? Do you think I'm a nut? I said, well, what do you use your car for? Well, I go up to Connecticut once in a while. In the winter, I vacation there. I can't use it. And so nobody really knows what he uses his car for anymore. It's very hard to discover that. So I don't know. I think that we, of course, building these giant highways, I believe, is a lost cause. In fact, last summer, do you remember last summer I took the trip on US 1, and the only reason I could get from here to Maine in a car was that I got off the superhighway. And it's like I'm driving over the hills and through the hedges and up and down through guys' backyards and under the culverts and all that, going by way of the non-turnpike route, which was far more civilized than going by way of the turnpike, where I could see this giant traffic jam for miles on the turnpike, and I'm banging along on the potholes, but nobody's ahead of me or behind me. So I don't know. It made me realize that the car has had it, actually. And owning a car particularly has had it. I suspect that in the end it's going to be one giant flyway, our world. It'll be an enormous flyway, and there will be, in each place where you go, there will be a pool of cars to rent, or some kind of private transportation. Other than that, I bet in 150 years, this country will be honeycombed with an enormous subway system. You will be able to get on what is the equivalent of a subway and ride from New York to Philadelphia at 125 miles an hour underground. I predict this. And it'll just take you there like a shot, underground. And there will be another subway that will connect Philadelphia to Washington. There will be a subway that will connect New York to Bridgeport. And it'll go right up into Boston. You'll get all these different subways. And, of course, you'll pay more. It won't be like a subway. You'll pay maybe $10 to get from here to Boston. But it will be in maybe 3 hours flat at 125 miles an hour. It'll just boom right up there. There will be other subways that will go probably out. They'll begin slowly, but I predict that eventually you'll be able to get into some kind of a subway that will go perhaps 200 miles an hour. It will go from here to places like Harrisburg, here to places like Wilmington, 45 minutes, something like that. It just has to be in the end. That's what will happen when there are 8 million people per square inch. They will no longer be able to give them the luxury of that 87 square feet of space that is the automobile. Just like schools. Have you encountered modern medicine, really modern medicine? That one of the things that's beginning to develop in our dehumanized world, of course everyone likes to think it's because we have bad values that our world is becoming inhuman, but I don't. I believe that it's the natural result of a genuine population growth. I don't think there will be any case to be made any longer for individual humanity. Have you recently been involved in modern medicine, either you guys? Well, I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things about modern medicine is its assembly line features. That growing up all over New York, for example, there are places where they have like 150, maybe 500 patients, and there might be 10 doctors, and you just come in on a great assembly line. They will examine you in a 2-hour period, 3-hour period of examination with X-rays and all that stuff, and they will make some kind of a diagnosis if there's anything wrong with you. And then there will be 8 different doctors who might take care of you. But there's no such thing as a patient. Dentists are going in for this now. This is where there will be 8 dentists in one office, and they will have thousands of patients. It will be like a giant clinic. It's like Sears Roebuck or something of the dentistry world. And it's a new system where the doctor doesn't even see you, until you're ready. I had to have some oral surgery done here sometime. It was a very interesting experience. And my dentist, he says, I realize I'm obsolete now. My real dentist, he says, I'm sending you to this place where they do oral surgery. And I said, well, who's going to do it? He says, I don't know. It's the place where they do oral surgery. And they're very good, but he says, there's a whole lineup over there. You don't know who you'll get or anything. And he won't even know you. So I says, oh, this is ridiculous. Well, here's the way it happened. I go to this place in the morning, and they've already been briefed by my dentist. They don't know. So I'm already briefed. They are. Not me, they are. And I arrive at this place, and there's a very faceless-looking girl. She asks you about 3 questions that are very general, and she's got a form already filled out on you. She says, wait one moment. And suddenly another type person comes out. These are they don't say good morning, Mr. Brown, or anything. They don't care you because there's 8 million other people behind you. They take you into a room, and they say, wait here. And the girl asks you 2 more questions. She leaves, and another girl comes, and she's got equipment. She takes your blood test. She just very efficiently, she writes it down. And she says, all right. She says, are you allergic to penicillin? You say no. She says, okay. She leaves. And you're waiting in there. You're in a room, and you don't know what's going to happen. There has not been one doctor that has been involved with you yet at this point. And so then she says, all right, come with me. This is another girl, remember. You've already been in 3 different girls. Each girl is in charge of one phase of the operation. The girl who has just left you, who's been taking the blood pressure, is now in 8 other patients' rooms taking the same blood pressure. So finally, another girl comes, Walt, and she says, come with me. You have not even seen this girl. And she says, come with me now. And she takes you into this room where the operation is about to be performed. And there is still no doctor. And not a single guy have you seen. They put you down in this girl. She does. She puts you down on the desk, in the chair. She does all the stuff, puts the cloth over you and the thing over your head and all that, and you're waiting there, and nothing happens. There has not been a doctor, and suddenly you hear for the first time a male voice, and he says to this female, who has now been joined by another one, he says to this female, all the preparations ready? And she says, yes. And suddenly a man moves into your sight. You have not seen him up to this instant. He now has a chart. He takes a quick look at it, which he has probably already looked at. He wants to make sure he's got the right one. He takes a quick look at it. Does not even look in your mouth. Get this. It's all done absolutely. Yeah, you're covered. Your little eyeballs are just looking out. Oh, yeah, you can't even see him. He's got a mask on. That's right. This guy looks like he can be Frankenstein or King Kong or a mad scientist. You know what he is. And then the one little moment of great humanity comes. He looks at you. He just looks at you through his mask, and he reaches his hand out. Well, now, the only thing, I didn't know whether he was going to grab me or hit me or what, so I stuck my hand out. I shook his hand. That's the only thing I could think of do. I shook his hand. He didn't say. He goes, and with that, they've rolled you. You got your sleeves up. They rolled you up, and they start with that. He says to the girl, these mysterious symbols that they use on us, 2cc, 2cc. He says like that. He says 1, 2, 3 drops. It goes in your arms. They're giving you the anesthetic, And he says, I want you to, he says, open your mouth wide. Can you hear me? And he's fading away. No. Boing! And it's all over. With that, you wake up, and he is cleared out. You don't see this guy anymore. And now another girl is behind you. She's the one that takes care of the blood. She's the one that comes in when all of it, and you're done. You know what? You get up, and everybody's gone. The whole Corps is my old friends, my old crew, the guy with the mask. Well, he's probably beheaded 9 other people since you've been out, So you get up, and she leads you, and you're staggering away back. You sit down in this room. She says, sit here. You sit down, and she's gone now. You think, well, now that's the blood one. That's the one she's going to be in charge of convalescence. And no. Suddenly another girl appears, and she says, what will you have? Will you have tea or coffee? Can you hear me? And of course, you're still out of your skull. Your eyeballs are going around. You've had the sodium pentothal, and birds are tweeting, and you're flying around the ceiling. She says, tea or coffee, please? Meaning she hasn't got time to fool around with this one guy. Tea or coffee? And I say, coffee, very good. Do you like it with sugar or cream or nothing? Your mind is just a staggering, nothing. And she says, very good. Instantly, you've got a cup of coffee. What am I doing? A cup of coffee? You start drinking a cup of coffee. And she says, if you desire, you may lay down. You may lie down. Sometimes people fall out of the window here. We like them to lie down. So I lie down for a second, and then I am up. And suddenly a girl comes with another one. I don't know the endless succession of these women, you see, all short, dark ladies with mustaches wearing white coats. Suddenly, none of them speak. I don't know, they have very special language. Suddenly she is there, and you think you are in the land of the egg people, or in some giant science fiction story, where these little monsters work on you. So she comes in and she says, are you all right? And you say yes, and then with that, grabs you by the scuff of the neck. You are up, and there 3 other little short guys are putting your coat on, and you are being propelled to the door. And and then you are sent down the chute to another place where a large lady with big glasses says, here, give this to your dentist's. No, she says, you are going to a drugstore. Do you have a drugstore? Yes. You don't know what's a yes. Do you have a drugstore? They talk to you like you're some kind of product or something. Do you have a drugstore? One thing interesting about these places, they treat all people as though they can neither hear, understand, or speak English. When in the new speak world, where everything is done by rote and automatic, they cannot take time out to say, well, this guy might be interesting. This guy might understand something. This guy here is a cretin. So they treat everyone like a cretin. Do you have a drugstore? Yes, madam, I do have a drugstore. You get a little bug. And then she gets very bugged because you are making an answer other than yes or no, which holds up the assembly line a little. She says, all right, ask for this. Can you read this? And I said, well, yes, I can read this. It says pot. It says marijuana or something. She says, very good, very good. Pay, please. And then they start asking for money right away. It's very automatic. So you reach in your pocket, and she's run a total credit check on you. It's all very automatic. They do not even accept money there. It's the only place in the world. I imagine you can get it on your Diners Club card there. You know, it's all on. Boom, 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 it goes. And so you sign the check, and she goes boom, boom, boom. And 10 seconds later, you are down on the street. You have not talked to anybody. You have not had any, the usual thing with the doctor, nothing like that. And it's all done in very, very impersonal fashion. Now, I don't know how I would get in touch with that guy with the mask at 3 o'clock in the morning if all of a sudden the top of my head started to fall out and I was bleeding out of the ears, That happens. I don't know. Who I want the guy with the mask, the one with the funny head, with the ears. Yeah, hey, dental place. I want the guy that shook my hands. Yeah, well, I don't know who he is. Who? And of course, they got a list of 798 guys. And what is a short one? They all wear masks. They're all short, and they got funny ears. Now, go to your local dentist. And, of course, my local dentist has already been swallowed up by the machine, and he's working in some place, obviously, where they go, tum, 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 ah, they hammer it out. Dum, 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 dum. He said that this is going all the way, that there are some places where they really compartmentalized it, where they have a phalanx of guys who only fill teeth on the lower left. These are right-handed guys who have trouble getting around. Then they have a phalanx of guys who fill them on the lower right. They have a phalanx of guys who put the rubber dams in, and all that, and nobody knows anybody else. He says, it's very interesting to find that one guy will work on one half of a thing, another guy will work on the other half. You'll be sent through the chute, and the other guy will finish it up with you'll polish it off, and down the chute you go. Oh, yeah, it's a mad scene. Well, of course, the doctors are working into this scene, too. There are very few doctors, that's one of the reasons why you can get some wild diagnoses. Really. You can get some insanely inadequate and inaccurate diagnoses when you're working on a giant assembly system. If that one little unusual thing comes in, like the tooth with 19 roots, comes in. Oh, that's true. I mean, I knew a guy that had a tooth that the roots went all the way down to his ankles. That's the fact. And it was his ankle was hurting. They didn't realize it was his tooth that was doing it. It went all the way down through him. Well, now, when that guy comes along, he's just not going to make it in these clinics. He's just not. Then they'll just drill him out, They just clean them all out. Get them all out. And that's it. They clean it off and start all over fresh with a set of friendly dentures that smile when you sleep. Well, now, these are all foretastes of things to come. I don't know how kindly old Dr. Christian would have fitted in with the Blue Cross plan. I'm just not quite so sure. And nothing is worse than a guy that comes down with something that's not listed in the Blue Cross. You try to get a good case of leprosy in Teaneck. Just find out what happens, Dad.